You are listening to the Game Like Training podcast, where we talk about golf practice, golf learning, and golf psychology, amongst all things golf. On this show, we are going to be sharing our thoughts and our beliefs that have come from over a decade of being in the industry. And not only that, but we'll be talking to industry leaders, world-renowned academics, and pioneering professors to bring you the most up-to-date information and evidence-based strategies to improve your game and your golf coaching. Hey, I'm one of your hosts, Matthew Cook.
And I'm your co-host, Eric Zeigel. And to get us started, just want to say here at Game Like Training, we love golf and we love helping people. So that combined has driven us to document and create this podcast. And we are extremely excited to bring you guys this information as well as strategies out there that we genuinely believe is our responsibility to share that information with as many people as we can. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
Yeah, so today's show is pretty cool. We have Nick Randall. He is the Vice President Sports and Performance at GravityFit. Nick, why don't you, before we get into the meat of this podcast, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and GravityFit?
Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, thank you, Matthew and Eric and GLT Golf, for having me on here. It's an absolute honour. Hopefully I can provide some information that gives some value to your listeners. And,
of course, thanks for joining us.
So
we appreciate your time and energy.
Is strength and conditioning. So I moved to Australia from the UK in 2009, and I started doing some personal training and quickly followed that up with strength and conditioning qualifications and some remedial massage qualifications as well. And the whole goal for me was to try and combine my two major passions, which were basically the gym and golf. I've been a golf tragic since I was about 13 years old, completely obsessed over the sport. And I thought if I was going to pick a career, it better combine those two things. And then, after that, nothing will really feel like work if I'm basically just helping people with and combining my passions. And so I started working with golfers pretty quickly, started collaborating with golf coaches. I was lucky enough to be involved in the Golf Queensland and the Golf Australia high performance setups over the next few years. And I learned a tremendous amount from being in those environments. They were easily the richest learning environments I've ever been involved with, because it was all about collaboration. So there was great coaches, there was physios, there was strength coaches, there was psychologists coming together on a regular basis throughout the year in a live scenario. So working with the high performance kids in the squads and comparing notes, going out for beers in the evening and basically just learning off each other and sponging off each other. And it was during that time when I was working in the high performance programs that I got exposed to GravityFit. So GravityFit is, I'll go into the detail a little bit later as to the proper background, but essentially this woman came and presented to us, called Dr. Carolyn Richardson. And she's a bit of a mad professor type. She was coming towards the end of her academic career at that point, and she came and presented to us this really novel concept of training the body, where we're looking at this deep muscle system, this thing that she called the gravity muscle system. And it was a totally different way of approaching training the body for me. Like strength and conditioning training is all about, training what you can see, training more the movement muscles and more about the biomechanics and the kinematics, I suppose. And she was talking about this idea of strengthening this deep muscle system that sat right throughout your body, that was absolutely key to stabilizing the spine and the joints. So that got me really excited, and I started using their stuff immediately. And this was in the kind of early days of GravityFit. So this is in 2013, 2014, when the tools were still fairly rudimentary and still in their experimental stage. I started using it with the players I was working with, started to get some really, really cool results in terms of injury prevention and cleaning up pain and discomfort and movement quality, especially both in the gym and actually in their golf action. I then took it on tour. One of the players I worked with through the Golf Queensland and the Golf Australia high performance programs ended up being Cameron Smith, who's a young Australian. He's just recently cracked the top 50 in the world. He won a couple of times last year. He won the Zurich Classic with Jonas Blixt, and he also won the Australian PGA last year. I've been working with him since he was 16, since he was a kid, and luckily enough for me, he ended up being really, really good. And he saw enough in me and had enough faith in me to take him on tour. So in 2016, 2017, I spent a couple of years with Cam and a couple of other players on tour, which was fantastic. And I got to take my GravityFit approach, along with my strength and conditioning approach, out on tour and work, and to see athletes of that caliber picking up and seeing the value in it was really exciting. So that's probably my background up until this point. Does that help give you a picture of where I've come from and how I've been involved with GravityFit?
Yeah, that's cool. Do you have any questions? Because I've got something to get into.
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of the fitness stuff that you hear about is, relating to, nutrition or the physical side of fitness. And I think your approach, I'm curious to hear more about this deep muscle system approach to training and how that can obviously be applied with advanced golfers at that professional level, as well as the benefits to using that product with, beginners and kind of where those.
That's interesting, isn't it? Like fitness has always been tied, at least from my perspective, and my perception has been built up with fitness and nutrition.
Yeah.
I've never heard of like deep muscle system. So it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on, Eric.
No, that's exactly where I was leading it. So I guess, Matthew, unless you have a question, can you talk a little bit more about kind of this deep muscle system and the benefits to training with the GravityFit and kind of how it engages that?
Yeah, where did, just to add to that question, where did this deep muscle system come from first?
Yeah, so the story is absolutely fascinating, at least for someone like myself who's a little bit of a nerd when it comes to, actually a lot of a nerd when it comes to
I've heard that
body and how the body works.
You told me this story, Nick, and I kind of know it, but it was so cool. I want to hear it all again. It's fascinating, and I think everyone needs to hear where this deep muscle system came from. So take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially the whole GravityFit journey basically started in 1987 when Dr. Richardson, the mad scientist I mentioned earlier, when she published her PhD research on how gravity and gravity forces affect the muscle firing patterns around the knee. So essentially her research pointed to when gravity is present, certain muscles are stimulated and fire and activate. That's what I mean by fire. And then when gravity isn't present, so when there's no essentially axial load or gravitational load on the joint or the limb in this case, other muscles basically fire. And so she took this principle, and it was basically this principle that guided the next 20 years of her research, and that included heading up the spine and joint research unit at the University of Queensland, which is one of the top medical schools in the world. So her body of research, her own personal body of research, started to grow around this topic. And then as she was overseeing other PhD students, the body of research was starting to grow and grow and grow, up to the point where in the early 2000s, she'd actually been published over 100 times on this topic.
Wow.
Her research, especially Paul Hodges, has been some of the seminal work on how the deep muscle system and the deep muscles around the core, the lumbar core area, are responsible for help protecting the spine and basically making sure that we help to prevent injury throughout the spine. And that's what a lot of Pilates stuff has been based on, and a lot of what we call remedial exercise has been based on over the years in terms of the lumbar core area. So this research culminated, I suppose, in the early 2000s, as I mentioned. She kind of cracked that 100 published papers mark, and she was actually brought on as a consultant to the European Space Agency and then later on NASA.
Wow again.
So the astronauts were going up into space and spending a long period of time or a concentrated period of time in a microgravity environment. And then they come back down to Earth. And then basically the Earth's atmosphere was a real problem for them. They couldn't tolerate the gravity load that they were experiencing back on Earth. And obviously the European Space Agency and NASA, this is a problem because they've invested millions of dollars in these astronauts, and they need to keep them healthy. And so they brought on a team of consultants, of which Dr. Carolyn Richardson was one of them. And they tried to work out what was going on with these astronauts. Why were they so weak when they were coming back down from space? Well, obviously, we can't necessarily put people in a clinical experiment in a completely microgravity environment. It's not very practical. And so what they basically did the Berlin bed rest study, where they laid people down in beds for weeks at a time, and they measured what was happening to their muscle firing patterns and their muscle strength through EMG. And what they found was that certain muscles, this deep muscle system, were getting really weak. From a neural perspective, those deep muscles were completely switching off. And that was becoming a real problem for the joint and spine, because then this deep muscle system basically helps to stabilize the spine, stabilize the major joints. And when it's switched off from a neural perspective, those joints become unstable and able to sustain injury. And so this was pretty groundbreaking at the time, but it was kind of what Dr. Richardson had been observing over the years of her research anyway. And then as Dr. Richardson sort of exited out of her academic career, she decided it was time to do something practical with the information that she'd uncovered. And so she partnered with a few people and designed a suite of exercise tools and a suite of exercises, which are basically designed to give you extra gravity load onto the body. Now, why is we as recreational golfers, or as basically normal human beings that A, don't go up into space, and B, don't spend weeks at a time in bed, why would we need this stuff? Well, essentially, if you look at our sedentary lifestyles now, we're spending more and more time sitting on computers, on phones, in poor posture. And then when we do exercise, it's generally fast, relatively ballistic movements, often with quite a high amount of load. And what we're seeing is basically a drawn-out version of what the astronauts were experiencing in space and what the bed rest patients were experiencing in that bed rest study, where we've got a gradual sort of breakdown of that neural connection to that deep muscle system. So the deep muscle system's getting weaker and weaker, our joints are getting more unstable, and then we're throwing them around in the gym and playing sports without a huge amount of support, and that's why we're seeing an ever-increasing amount of musculoskeletal injury. So
that is an incredible
Dr. Richardson basically partnered up, as I said, developed some tools to help give extra axial load or gravity load onto the body to help stimulate and fire up that deep muscle system, along with providing feedback as to whether we're doing it in good posture and with good form or not. So that's where we're at the moment. So the tools are essentially designed to help prevent injury. Where it comes into golf is through this Golf Australia program that I mentioned earlier. The coaches and physios and strength coaches got pretty creative with the equipment and realized that it was actually, and certain elements of the equipment were actually really well suited to training movement patterns and actually training skill acquisition. And you can actually use the equipment with club in hand to hit shots and get feedback and get this axial load to help strengthen the body, but also get feedback on whether you're moving correctly. And that's what's excited so many coaches and so many trainers who are working in golf.
Yeah, for sure. So it's, first off, that story is incredible. Thanks for sharing a little bit about how kind of that came about. That the whole NASA thing and all that is just, that's pretty phenomenal. And seeing how that can now be applied into golf is pretty incredible. So is this a strength and conditioning tool, as well as kind of that, like you said, the posture awareness, what does that look like for beginner golfers? Because you did speak a little bit about how you've used it with some of these better players. The benefits to using this for beginner golfers. Have you guys done anything with that? Because that's kind of where my mind goes initially. Being able to put this tool on somebody who's new to the game and understanding how to kind of keep everything
optimal.
That's
where my mind goes as well, Nick. Because it's such a good product with so much science behind it to support it that is just phenomenal, that I think a potential breakdown for coaches or golfers, those people on the receiving end of the product using it, is how they navigate through the I guess, the framework of challenge point that you hear a lot about these days, but the varying levels of skill, how do these coaches and players navigate using the product for their different levels? That's where mine goes, right?
That's a really good question. My own experience has been mostly in that elite space. So probably from my own experience, I can't comment too much. But what we are seeing is an ever-increasing amount of coaches who are working with all kinds of standards of player, finding benefit from using the gear. And especially the one device they're using a lot is the T Pro, which is T is short for thoracic. So it's the device that helps to strengthen the shoulder girdle and the thorax, and also suits really well to training rotation. And as it applies to the more recreational golfer or someone looking to make improvements in the early start of their kind of golfing journey, the feedback is very useful and it's very intuitive. So you don't necessarily need to be a great player to benefit from the equipment and the feedback it gives you. Feedback is really rudimentary and really quite simple. For something that's got a lot of science behind it, the application is super simple. So you're essentially trying to establish 3 points of contact across the T-spine. You're trying to maintain tension on the tubing out the front, and then you're trying to rotate with your arms in front of your body. And then the coach from there can take it in any direction they want. So they can start to trick things up, and they can use the device in different ways to help train the skill acquisition or the movement patterns that they're trying to achieve for that particular student. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an elite player with immense amount of skill to benefit from it. In fact, I'd say that the more basic and the newer you are to golf, the more benefit you'll get from it, just because, as we know, when we're starting anything, the acquisition of skill is quite a steep curve at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like I'm picturing the product now, and just from if we take a stance on the motor learning side of the table, which is where my real interest and passion and most of my, I guess, skill set and knowledge is in.
Yes.
You know, I would look at this and from the feedback perspective, which I think is fascinating with how simple this is, and the feedback the production of feedback for the player or the coach using the product. You know, I think with some simple protocols in place for those newer golfers or the beginning golfers, or for coaches that are using it with newer golfers, is quite simple. Like you have more feedback, or as much feedback as possible, really, to begin with, because that's what a player at that low skill level needs. They need the coach to tell them. They need the training device to tell them. They need to build up this the very basic picture in their mind of what this movement looks like, feels like. So I think it's great there. And then as the player improves, with a simple protocol again for coaches or the players, once they are at X handicap, or once they are scoring these types of scores, then you start to reduce the feedback, and you start to maybe after 5 or 10 shots, you then get feedback, but it's not instantaneous anymore. It's a little delayed, so we can try to get students cognitively engaged. I think from a feedback perspective, there's a lot of opportunity there from a motor learning perspective to help the use of such a device, because we talk about that, myself and Dr. Tim Lee talk about that quite a bit, about the use of guidance devices or just the use of training aids in general and training tools. And this one being as unique as it is, coaches and players can benefit a lot from adjusting the type and amount, frequency of feedback for optimal learning, for sure. What's your take on that? I know you're in a different sector of sports rather than motor learning, but what's your take on what I just said regarding motor learning and feedback?
Well, for me, had a little bit of exposure to motor learning. It's not my key. It's not my key skill, but it makes total intuitive sense. It's for a beginner golfer. You'd know it's very easy to go down the wrong path. And once you've gone down the wrong path, if you're allowed to continue down that path in terms of movement quality, then the further you go down that path, the more ingrained that movement pattern becomes, and the further you have to travel back to then change to another one. So if we can almost create a narrow corridor in terms of the quality of movement that you're allowed to move in, and the device gives you feedback on that, then that will hopefully keep you on track and stop you deviating off and going off down these different paths. Whereas, like you said, with an elite player, you need to be pretty careful with what the information you give them, because they've already established a pattern that works because they're good, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so you need to be quite careful in the information you deliver them, because they're already on their own track. They're already on the right track towards high performance. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't smash them with loads of feedback, and we wouldn't recommend that elite players use the device all the time. It'd be more to check back in, probably under the supervision of a coach, to make sure that their movement quality is where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think the cool thing to me about this product is it can obviously be used in that skill acquisition, but it's also and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like it's also a strength device as well as like an injury prevention tool. Is that correct?
That's right. So you get three main benefits. You get postural feedback. So in a golf setting, it's basically you get feedback on your setup position, especially of how your T-spine is organized relative to your shoulder blades and your shoulder girdle, which, as we know, is really, really important. And then you also get the axial load, so that gravity load for injury prevention. So you've got postural feedback, the injury prevention aspect, and then you can start using it to train a movement pattern perspective as well. So you can use it for the skill acquisition or the movement pattern training. So you've got these three benefits of postural feedback or setup feedback, axial load for injury prevention, and then the ability to train movement patterns as well. So it sort of covers those 3 points.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm interested, Nick, because you're out on tour, you're working with professional athletes, top 50s in the world, and I guess no doubt lots of young elite golfers coming through the ranks. You're working with a lot of good players, good quality players that have movement to the level that is very highly proficient. How do and I guess you also probably work with golf coaches, swing coaches as well. I bet you're
very closely, yeah.
I bet you're in a team most of the time. There's a golf coach, there's this guy, and you're one of the guys in the team, no doubt. Am I correct in saying that?
That's absolutely correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm interested, super interested to know, how do you specifically use this device with those players? And if you could tell us a couple of exercises and circuits or some of the practical aspects of what you do with an elite player with this tool, that would be great, because I'm sure the listeners and people watching the YouTube videos, they'll want to know some of that so they can get the product and implement it. So if you could tell us, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So I suppose the two main examples I can give you or the two examples that demonstrate most clearly the way that you can use the devices with an elite players would be Jonas Blixt. We used it for him. He came to see me in the end of 2016, October 2016, with some serious back issues. So once he was cleared by his doctor, we started working on gently rehabilitating his back. And for me, it was all around building awareness around his movement. Jonas is a super guy and an incredibly talented player. But when it comes to gym movements, he seems to have quite a short-term memory in terms of what the optimal movement is. And so he was one of these people that got off down the wrong path really quickly. And so we used the device for him. We used a thing called the core awareness belt to basically train awareness around his lumbar area and his pelvis to try and get that more stabilized so we could take some pressure off his back. That was number one. And then number two, we started introducing the T-Pro and the Gravity Cap, which is the other two bits of equipment. And we started loading him up gently from a postural and a gravity perspective to try and get that deep muscle system fired up, because especially when there's pain and severe pain present, that muscle system basically shuts off, and that's really well documented.
Wow.
And a term I've come across recently is central wasting. So this basically the central nervous system sort of switches off essentially for that particular. It's the feedback loop kind of breaks down for the area of the body where there's pain, and so for him it was trying to get that deep muscle system fired back up again, along with postural awareness, to just make sure his movement quality wasn't going to continue stressing his back. So that's an example for Jonas, and what I can do for the listeners, actually, I can provide some links to a case study that I've written on that, which will probably give you a lot more detail and give you some visuals as well, give you some photo and video sort of examples of what I did with Jonas. Then the other example would be with Cam Smith. So Cam I've worked with since he was a young kid. As I said, we had the luxury of basically building a foundation from the ground up with Cam over a long period of time. So for Cam, it's a lot more simple. He just has some postural tendencies that he tends to that he always reverts back to. It's part of playing golf for a living and traveling a lot and being potentially a little bit lazy with how he approaches his posture. So he tends to get a bit of a poking chin forward head position, and the right shoulder, and that likes to drop down and go low as the right pec sort of tightens up. And so for us, we need to give him basically daily reminders and daily stimulus to help the deep muscle system around those two areas, the neck and this right shoulder, to fire properly, to hold him in position a little bit better. And that goes along with release work and gym work and all the rest of it. So for Cam, it's more of just a daily reminder or a daily drill to get back into his best postural form, because for Cam, when his head comes forward and when the shoulder drops down, that leads to him getting a little bit wide with his arms, a little bit away from his body with the arms, club face a bit shut, and then he sort of fights the quick lefts or the push rights from that position, because from that position, from arms away from the body and the shut club face, he then has to work back under, and the club comes from in behind a little bit, and then as you would know, that often results, especially with a good player, with a quick left or a push right, depending on how the timing gets matched up through impact. So I suppose those are the two examples, and they're quite different. They're two elite players who are playing the same sport and trying to achieve the same thing, but they have very, very different physical priorities, and that's how I address those priorities with the GravityFit equipment.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What I'd like to do as well, if we can, is maybe provide some video to the listeners, where, as opposed to me just talking and you imagining what I'm doing, perhaps we could actually provide some video where I'm giving some instruction and showing the different techniques. That might be useful.
Well, you know, Nick, Ben, the video guy, he's very talented when it comes to things like this. So on the current screen right now, like in the top left corner or the top right corner, I don't know if he's doing a Snapchat or something right now, but what will come up in one of the corners of the screen is some links to you doing what you're saying, and we'll leave links of different videos and places where you would like to direct people to not just listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth now, but to see you do this in action. So we'll link all of that. That's great. Yeah, we'll link that for sure. We'll tie it into some articles after this podcast as well, so everyone will get to see that. Don't worry.
Yeah, I got kind of two separate questions. The first one,
he likes to make things complicated.
I do. I'm trying to simplify this as best I can.
Sometimes I bet he'll forget the second point because it's that complex.
Yeah, I wrote the second one down. The first one I didn't.
He's even wrote it down.
Oh, of course I wrote it down. All right, so the first one, not all coaches are fortunate to have somebody as knowledgeable as yourself when it comes to kind of the physical aspects of injury prevention or even assessing a player's abilities. So, what would you recommend to the coaches out there that are interested in your tool on kind of the best ways or the easiest ways to implement? Because I know you said you guys have 3 different products. Is that correct? Because I think I've only seen the one that goes on the T-spine.
That's the product that most golfers and coaches are using. The other two products are more physiotherapy or strength and conditioning based. And so if I was a coach, I would definitely focus on the T Pro, which is the one from the T Spine. It's actually this guy here, if you can see that okay. So if you're going to use a product, I would definitely use the T Pro. In terms of accessing information and how to use it, we've recorded a bunch of videos with coaches and without coaches, basically me on my own or combining with coaches to give some practical examples of how to use it and when you might want to use it. And then and we've also got a coach's course that we've recorded that's on our website as well. So we can get you access to that if you contact us and make an inquiry. We can get you access to the coach's course, which is filmed live in a venue in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. That can give you a pretty good idea as well as to the practical application, and that'll fit nicely with what you've heard today about the theoretical aspect of the company.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that.
What's your second point, Eric?
Oh, the second point was I was going to ask how many tools you have, but I kind of worked that into the first question. So I simplified it. You see what I did there?
Ah, good job.
I managed to simplify it. Yeah,
job.
Thank you.
And you know what? We'll shoot some videos when you come in town, Nick. We'll share it with people as well.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Perfect.
So I guess I have a question. Most things you've said are on your website. We can go to the website, or people can reach out to you directly.
Yes.
For just for more information, the coach's course and things like that, for further help. But you mentioned a lot of research now, over, was it 100 papers?
100 published papers. Yeah.
Yep. Where can people go to get hold of this research? On the website as well?
So we have a document called the Science Base, which is basically a 100-page document that's that if you want to delve a little bit deeper into the background of what this is all about, it summarizes the research in quite a practical way. It's not too dry, it's not too heavy. If you've got a bit of background anatomical knowledge, that'll definitely help, but it's not completely essential. And then in that Science Base, all the studies are referenced, and so then you can go and look them up. You may have to have access to certain journals, or if you go through an academic organisation like a university, then you can definitely access them. Yeah. Some of them are completely public, but a lot of them, obviously, the journals want you to subscribe and pay to access the studies.
Yeah.
So you can take that as deep as you want, I suppose. The Science Base, not many people really enjoy reading publications.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe we can create some quick start guides for it one day.
So the Science Base will give you a really good summary, or a practical summary of the research over the years. On that note, actually, Matthew, we're just about to publish the findings from a study that we've just done with between NASA and Deakin University. So essentially, NASA have helped basically fund this study, where we're putting our phase 2 of our equipment, which is actually garments, like wearables.
Yeah.
Essentially a whole body suit that you can wear that gives you this actual load with the postural feedback. So putting this suit on people, putting them in an MRI, and then watching what happens in live time, what's happening to their deep muscle system.
Wow.
And the findings from the initial pilot have been really, really positive. So we're about to make that available to the public as well.
How much is that going to be?
Well, the Science-based document right now is $40, and that's on the site. If you contact us directly and ask nicely, we might be able to get you access to it. And then with regards to the pilot study, we'll probably just give a summary of the findings, I would say.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, and hearing your story, and really hearing the story of GravityFit. It is remarkable. I think our listeners and people that are watching will appreciate it a lot, and no doubt they'll all want to go and get this product because it's pretty amazing. So, is there anywhere people can go to maybe communicate with you directly? Because no doubt there's tons of questions that we haven't asked, and people will no doubt want to ask. So, is there anywhere people can go? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, direct email, or like where would you prefer people reach you at? Where do you hang out the most?
Yeah, I'm not much of a social media guy, so Nick R, so it's Nick R at GravityFit.com is the best way to reach me. We do have a social media kind of outlet. Instagram is probably the best option there if you want to see some more kind of practically applied stuff and how people are using it on a daily basis. So if you just want to check us out, then Instagram's a good one. We are GravityFit is the handle there, and then, or is that even the right terminology? Profile, whatever. Yep. And then if you want to contact me directly with a question, then Nick R at GravityFit.com is perfect.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited, Nick. Eric, super excited.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time and your energy towards the show. It means a lot. And I'm sure everyone listening and watching will appreciate it too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you guys in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Likewise.
All right. So to keep up to date with us and the show, everybody, you can either subscribe to our mailing list. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, basically any social channel except for Snapchat. We're not quite there yet. And if you want to not only listen to this, but you want to watch it and see two people who are really designed, or faces are designed for the radio, then you can do that on YouTube. But thanks for listening and tuning in, and we'll catch you all next time. Thank you.